Cops. What simple noise complaint call blew way out of proportion? I'm a cop, verified over on Protect and Serve. We once got a noise complaint about a loud noise from the upstairs apartment. It was about 3 a.m., and the caller told dispatch it sounded like the upstairs neighbor was moving furniture and dropping stuff. Fair enough. 3 a.m. is no time to be moving furniture and disturbing neighbors. I get there, get to the hallway where the apartment is, and immediately hear arguing and screaming. Call for another unit. Proceed down the hallway and find the apartment door almost completely shattered in the frame. I yell, "Police, coming in!" and go inside, since this seems like someone is in danger. Sure enough, I get in there. Girl's face is completely beaten in. The apartment is in complete disarray. Woman said she fell and that's why her face was injured. Says they just moved in, which explains the mess. Says her husband is out of town on business. He had actually gone out the fire escape when I yelled out police. We took her statement and still wound up charging the guy with domestic violence. Case got dismissed when the wife came to court and continued her "I fell down and the floor punched me in the face 30 times" story. For a more lighthearted story, we kept getting fireworks complaints from this one lady on 4th of July, so we finally went over and talked to her. She made some good points about fireworks are illegal and they're shooting them off over her house. We tried making the point it's the 4th of July. If we responded to every fireworks complaint, we wouldn't respond to anything else, but we would go talk to the neighbors. Went over and said, "Hey, look, just be a good neighbor. Cut it out. I don't want to write fireworks tickets, but if this continues to be a problem, we will." Left feeling like we were all on the same page. As I was walking back to my squad car, when the idiots came running around the other side of their house and start firing Roman candles at me. And others decided to set off some other fireworks underneath my squad car. That's one way to go from getting a verbal warning to multiple felonies, which wound up not even getting indicted because the prosecutor didn't think it was that big of a deal, and they were just having fun on the 4th of July, and we couldn't go out and enforce every fireworks complaint on the 4th of July, and I'm still pissed about it. Story 2. When I was a volunteer cop, I'm a regular now, a few years back, I was just about to leave to go home, around 3 a.m. Call comes in for my buddy. We're single crewed as standard. About some old man locked out of his house. I offered to come with to help just in case and put my kit back on. Cue when we get there, and it's not an old man. It's a middle-aged man who's quite built and drunk. He kicks off with my mate, who pepper sprays him, which I watched majestically bounce off his cheek and hit me straight in the eye. I turn back, in pain and half blind, to see him punch my mate in the face. I dive across and pick him up and get him against the wall. His Staffordshire Bull Terrier then proceeds to rip my right leg to shreds, so I'm then trying to fight both of them. Manage to get the dog away and we cuff him, shouting for assistance, which led to all of my shift turning up. Guy had the audacity to fight it in court, too. Edit. Not a noise complaint, but whatevs. Edit 2. No, I did not in fact cuff the doggy. I cuffed the bad man. Story 3. I'll throw in my story here. Why not? Worked in Harlem 8 years. Have since moved over to Jamaica, Queens, but I was driving my sergeant that night and we were at the corner of 145 and 8th Avenue. There's a Popeyes in that corner, but above it is 5 stories of apartments. We're stopped at the light heading westbound, and all of a sudden we start hearing a loud screaming coming from one of the windows above Popeyes. It was the summer and our windows were open, so my sergeant looks up and says, "Holy crap." So I immediately lean down and look out the windshield to see a white lady in her 40s hanging out the window, screaming at the top of her lungs. She's covered in blood, her hair's a mess, and she's screaming for help. I quickly pull the car over and ask for an additional while we go up the stairs to the apartment. When we exit out the stairwell, there's smeared blood all over the walls leading into the apartment, which has its door cracked open. We head in slowly, guns drawn, and we see a man step out from the bathroom who doesn't have a single scratch on him. We scream at him to get on the ground and quickly cuff him up while screaming continues in the back room. As we get him up off the floor, our additional shows up and we quickly pass him off to them and head to the back of the apartment, guns still drawn towards the screams. As we round the corner into the living room, we see a woman in a torn undershirt covered in blood and scratches, and she has a cat on her back, and she's whipping her body around trying to get it off her. She slams herself into the wall, and the cat finally lets go and falls to the ground. It looks at us and heads back towards the lady when all of a sudden she kicks it like a football. And I mean like a Sebastian effing Janikowski type kick. and it flies through the air and almost hit the ceiling as it bounced off the wall and scurried behind the couch. I asked her what's going on and if her boyfriend did this to her, and she screams at us, "No, this effing cat is trying to kill me." Needless to say, we quickly get the guy out of cuffs and have to call ESU to come catch this psychotic cat. That's one that will stay with me till retirement. Story 4. First off, this is why we wolfpack every call, even though our supervisors don't want us wasting time responding to seemingly simple noise complaints and 911 hangups. We had a noise complaint coming from a small community saying there was a party out in one of the arroyos down this long private drive. Like 3 or 4 calls saying there was a huge bonfire and music. 3 of us are on shift and start cruising out there. It's like 10 miles away, so we're driving fast but not running code. About 4 miles out, we hear the ambulance get dispatched for a shots fired call in the same area, and they're told to stage for law enforcement. We always get the med calls a few minutes after Central, so we keep cruising. The call from our dispatch catches up a couple minutes later, telling us to expedite as the shots are coming from the same area we're headed to. We run code, get there, and see about 15 cars coming down the private drive. People start jumping out of the passenger seats and back seats and running into the night. We squeeze by the line of cars. We pull up to the bonfire and get down with our rifles. One guy is laying on the ground, shot. His girl is screaming and laying over him. There's still about 15 more abandoned cars and people are running everywhere. The guy ended up getting shot right above his nipple with the 9mm. He survived but wouldn't tell us who shot him. He and his girl both stated they didn't know anyone at the party, even though it was 4 miles off the main road. Story 5. Not a cop, but was at a party that my friend had that the cops were called. The guy who owned the house was blacked out, and one of those guys who likes to show off by being badass. Well, cop comes, super nice guy, joking around with us, asking us to just have fun at a reasonable noise level. Owner of the house says, "F the police, I'll handle this myself." Turns the music as loud as it can be and sparks a joint. Cop still being in the garage. Cop told all of us that didn't live there, all being respectful to him, to just get home safe. Next day, owner of the house is calling everyone there asking why he has over $1,000 worth of fines pinned to his refrigerator. It's crazy how being drunk or intoxicated can take you in one of two directions. You can either be extremely nice or just extremely belligerent and angry and irrational. And it's like, this cop, if there was ever a cop that you wanted to bust in on your house party, this is it. And you just totally ruined it. Man. Story 6. Not a cop, but when I was a senior in high school, we had a party at this dude's duplex. Yeah, it was classy. None of us were 21, but we were all drunk. Someone called the cops about the noise and traffic on the street. Cop shows up, was cool, just told us to take it outside. One of the girls asked the cop to check on the tenant next door because they heard the lady arguing with some guy. About that time, the guy staggers out of the duplex with a big-ass knife sticking out of his chest, and the lady behind him with another big-ass knife in her hand. The cop draws on the lady and tells her to put the knife down, which she did, right between the dude's shoulder blades. As drunk as I was, I thought I was seeing things, but nope, it happened. Story 7. Okay, I'm also not a cop, and my story happened when I was maybe 5 to 6 years old, so details are hazy for me. This would have been in the 90s in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in case anyone might recognize the story. One night, a guy comes to our door and starts banging on it unrelentingly. My dad sees this big, shirtless guy who looks like he's running for his life. My dad, being another big, shirtless guy, decides to have me and my siblings go to our rooms, and he lets him in, as he was soaking wet and it was cold out. He sat on the couch, and I remember my dad wrapping him in a blanket, and all he could say, over and over, was, "Thank you, thank you. I saw toys in your yard, and I knew you would help me." My dad assumes the guy is delirious, possibly drunk, and calls the cops when he starts to really freak out. He didn't want the neighbors calling because they assumed a fight was happening in our home. We had an old, super nosy neighbor who loved making noise complaints against my dad. Next thing my sister and I know, we're looking out our bedroom window at a veritable sea of squad cars, all the way down the street. Turns out, the guy was running for his life, and the guy he was running from had already killed a friend of his, and had the body in the trunk of his car. Story 8. Mine's a little different, blown out of proportion. Four of us were sitting around a wooden table playing quarters at around 8 p.m. on a Friday with the sliding door open because it was nice out. Cops knock on the door due to a noise complaint. Apparently, our low conversation and the sound of quarters hitting the table irritated the neighbors while they sat on their deck, 200-ish feet away. You know, some people just roll out of bed in the morning and just choose to be pricks, and it sounds like your neighbors are those kinds of people. They clearly aren't really bothered by what you're doing. They just want to make your lives a little bit more difficult. Why? Not really sure. That's just how some people are. Story 9. Not a cop, but I've called one in that did not end the way I expected. So my first apartment after college was in a high-rise and had really thick walls. I blasted my TV and Xbox and couldn't ever hear them in the hallway, and I never heard a single thing that any of my neighbors ever did. One night, I started hearing some loud thumps coming from the apartment above me. A few months ago, part of my apartment had flooded because of a torn water line going into the washing machine above me that happened during a domestic disturbance where the guy wound up leaving in handcuffs. Knowing that there was this history in that apartment, I called the cops in case it was a repeat occurrence. I can't stress enough how thick those walls and floors were. I had never heard anything through them. So the cops get there and stop by to talk with me first. I give them the rundown of what happened in the past, and they could easily hear the loud thumps and crashes, so they headed on up to check it out. Not 90 seconds later, they're back at my door, both trying to keep from laughing. You absolutely did the right thing to call us, but don't worry, it was just a couple huge fat guys playing Wii Sports. Have a nice weekend. That's when I found out how much crap went on in my apartment building that was in a decent neighborhood. Even without poverty, you still get a-holes. The rest of that story is that I went to the lobby first to try and find the security guard, who could have reacted faster but couldn't find him. I did, however, find another woman who also agreed that the police needed to be called in case someone needed help. She was very insistent and let slip that the reason she was in the lobby was hiding from her abusive boyfriend. I gave her my phone number and apartment number and told her that if she ever needed somewhere safe, to not hesitate to just show up at my door. A few months later, she did actually take me up on it, which led to another semi-amusing encounter. I was in the shower when she knocked, and my wife, then girlfriend or fiance, can't remember the exact time frame, was the one to answer the door when a random woman showed up at 9 p.m. My wife was fine with it and immediately let her in, and then got filled in on what the situation was, but the poor woman, obviously not used to a healthy and stable relationship, was terrified that showing up was going to cause a fight between my wife and I. She wound up crashing on our couch for a few days while my wife, on break from school and home during the day, slowly worked at getting through the brainwashing and convincing her to leave him. In the end, she did contact support networks in the city and left him, I think deciding to move in with friends or family out of town. Without any further info, I definitely hope that she did stay away from him. That dude was a scumbag and flat out dangerous. Story 10. Not a police officer, but I used to have a mentally unstable neighbor. One night, she was screaming at our house from her balcony about the noise we were making and how she had called the cops. She didn't have the TV or stereo on. I was alone mashing potatoes in a stainless steel pot, and the clink 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 of the metal masher on the pot somehow carried across the yard and aggravated her so much she needed to call the police. The police show up, knock, and ask about the noise complaint. I explained that I was mashing potatoes and demonstrated the noise. They told me that they regularly respond to noise complaints from her, and only 2 days before, she had complained because her back neighbor was hammering in a picture hook at 2 in the afternoon. They tell me to just ignore her and bid me farewell. Story 11. Here's a good one. House party, all in our mid-20s. Drunk friend, we'll call her Louise, is shammered. So drunk that she's taking a hammer to some of the hand-me-down furniture in the house. Owner doesn't care. He thinks it's hilarious. Louise's screaming and loudness makes its way outside. She's screaming, "I am Spartacus! I'll kill you all!" I mean, really screaming, "I will kill you all!" a lot. It's like 10 p.m. on a Friday in Florida. Quiet neighborhood. She and her BF leave. Not even 5 minutes later, 6 TPD cruisers and about a dozen cops come rolling in. Apparently, they were there on a potential homicide investigation as they got a call about a woman screaming bloody murder, and it sounded like someone may be getting killed. Owner is detained, agrees to let the cops do a walkthrough of the house to make sure there's no blood/corpses of concern, only drunk college-age D-bags. Cops walked through, thanked us, asked us to keep the volume reasonable, and left. Story 12. Not a police officer, but a former dispatcher. We got a call one night of loud music. Normally, officers don't go on these types of calls, especially on a busy weekend night, But this caller called a crap ton of times and was a pain, and the beat officer was bored, so he went to the apartment complex. He disregarded his backup and responded alone. About 5 to 10 minutes later, he called for backup, so I started one. Nothing unusual. I figured it was just a big party or something, and he needed assistance breaking it up. About 30 to 45 minutes later, he called for a supervisor. This was very unusual, as supervisors never respond on noise complaints, and they hadn't arrested anyone or given any indications that they'd had to fight anyone or anything else where a supervisor would respond. Turns out there was a 13 to 14-year-old girl who was there alone because her parents were away for the weekend. She had been chatting with a 30-something guy from a town 2 to 3 hours away. Since her parents were gone, he came down to keep her company. When the cop got there, he discovered that she was there with him and saw used condoms all over the place apparently. Guy went to jail. Girl went to the children's home. Story 13. Super late to this, so I'll make it short. Ex-cop, New South Wales, Australia. Got sent to a street out the back of our sleepy little town. Someone was using a chainsaw at 2 a.m. Not unusual because the properties are really big, but this was being done next to another house in a garage. Turned out to be a lady chasing her husband around the room trying to jab him in the no-no zone with the chainsaw. Story 14. I got dispatched to loud music one night in an apartment complex. I arrived and could clearly hear Snoop Dogg being played while I was standing in the parking lot. I banged on the door for well over a minute to no avail. I opened the door to find two stoners higher than Jesus Christ on a motorbike. Guy was laying on the couch while his friend was laying on the floor. I see clear as day a pound of weed on the floor next to the guy. He was hugging it like Tom Hanks hugged Wilson. He looks up at me with a look of pure disgust and says, quote, "No, I don't take kush." All right, pal. Story 15. I usually don't work a night shift, but when I had to, of course, I'm the one dealing with some creepy crap. Some old lady reported that weird noises can be heard from her neighbor's house, and she sounded desperate, so we went there with my colleague. We showed up, and it was completely silent on the street. The old lady met us on the street in her dressing gown, and she told us that she heard screamings coming from her next-door neighbor's house. It was weird because she didn't mention any screamings in the call. Another way, we would be there much faster. So we're knocking. No one answers. My colleague consulted the case with our supervisor, and he allowed us to go in. He also sent the reinforcements. Okay, so we force the doors and go in. It's dark and quiet. We were searching the house only with our flashlights, and we found nothing. We go to the floor and searching room by room. No one. The house is empty. My colleague is calling supervisor again, and suddenly I hear him screaming like a little girl. He jumped back to me with true effing fear in his eyes. His hand went for the gun, and then I saw it too. The old lady was in the home, and she started charging at us with an evil grin and making some scary hissing noises. My colleague was ready to shoot her, but unfortunately the fear paralyzed him. The old lady got to us, screaming and beating us, but she was so weak that we barely felt anything, lol. Turns out that she had suffered from schizophrenia. I have no idea how it was possible that she was diagnosed so late, but good thing that it happened. We checked her house next, and she was living in terrible conditions, even if the house was nice from the outside. The owners of the house weren't really pleased after they heard what happened, lol. Story 16. Oh, I have a good one for this. While I wasn't a cop, I was one of the multiple neighbors calling it in. For months, a neighbor that lives behind me played music with a lot of bass super loud in the middle of the night, usually not starting till 11 p.m. We tried going over there as a neighbor and saying, "Hey, all of our walls are thin and your neighbors are only like 20 to 30 feet away from you. Your music is so loud, it's shaking things in our place. Can you please turn it down?" He says, "Yeah, of course, no problem." Worth to mention, when he opened the door, it was pretty clear he was doing meth or cocaine right before opening the door. So he turns it down and we think, okay, cool, problem solved. It's quiet for the next few days. Then it starts up again, and we try to go talk to him, and he's extremely rude this time, yelling at us through the door without actually opening it and such. So we decided we would call and make a noise complaint. We knew exactly where it was coming from, so it would be easy. So we call the cops, and they come over that night, and that's the last we hear of it again for a few days. He does it again, and we just call immediately this time, and I told the officer I would sign a citation, hoping it would make this guy stop. So the officer comes and talks to me and tells me the deal with it, and we decide that we'll go talk to him again and give him a warning, and in the meanwhile, I'll try to record it so I can present it in court. No citation this time. So he keeps the music going on and off for the next couple of weeks when we decided to call again. The officer comes over and tells me that all my neighbors have been calling him in too, every night, for the last 6-ish weeks, and he's sick of this guy's attitude. I've been the only one willing to sign a citation, so if I sign it, the cop will come to court with all the video footage he has, so I don't even have to worry about the evidence. So I sign it. My husband and I are thinking, finally, it's over. 2 nights go by and I'm coming home from work late at night when I notice several cops and a fire truck parked outside this guy's place. I can also smell smoke. I think, great, this guy lit his place on fire cooking drugs. So I rush to my place to make sure everything's okay. The fire engine and everyone leaves not too long after. Come to find out, the next morning, the guy was being loud again, so a neighbor called it in. When the cops came by and told him to be quiet, this guy got pissed at the neighbor. He went and started banging on the neighbor's house/windows, etc., trying to scare him and such. The police get called back and get this guy into his house. They decided to stick around for a bit to make sure he doesn't start again. At this point, he comes out of the house with a samurai sword, growling and foaming at the mouth, and charges at the officers. They tased him. He got charged with 5 felonies and several misdemeanors as well. My neighborhood is so peaceful now. Story 17. Could possibly qualify as today I effed up, but it was over 20 years ago. I responded to a loud noise/party complaint that turned out to be a group of drunk adult women skinny dipping in a backyard pool. The FU part was telling dispatch to give me the call if the complainants called back. The dispatcher, a woman, found out what it was about and turned me into the commander. No disciplinary action, but she stayed pissed for a while. Hey man, I cannot blame you one bit. Willing to risk it all just to catch perhaps another glimpse. Gotta love it. That's a funny story. Glad you didn't get in trouble though. You didn't deserve that. That's funny. Story 18. I'm not a cop, but I called them one time to complain about crazy loud noises coming from the apartment beneath us when I just wanted to sleep. Turns out they had a small weed farm in that house. We lived above it for at least a year. Then the cops kept me awake the whole night cleaning out that apartment, so I still didn't sleep. Story 19. Not a cop, but one night in college I was sitting on my apartment balcony studying and the old lady next door is yelling and screaming at me to turn the noise down. I didn't do anything because I'm just studying. No music, no laptop, just my books and notes. She called the cops and he talks to me. I give my statement about how she harasses anyone and everyone who's walking past her yard, whispering or just outside. Police goes to get her statement and she slapped him across the face. I didn't hear the conversation, but she did get arrested. So a simple noise complaint turned into the lady being arrested for assault. Story 20. I'm not a police officer, but recently in Niagara Falls, New York, we've been having some extremely strong windstorms. For those who have never been there, it's pretty open space surrounded by the city. Well, during the last windstorm, residents of the city called police because the wind was too loud for them to sleep. Story 21. Not a cop, but we had a noisy neighbor who lived right across the hall from us. They would always be banging around and yelling at 2 a.m. One night, the cops came and kicked the door in. Through the peephole, I saw them tackle the guy and haul him off in handcuffs while his girlfriend screamed. Turns out, he was harboring a known fugitive. Story 22. Story from my dad's cop days. He and his partner respond to a call for a noise complaint and possible DV. It was at an apartment complex with a fenced-in courtyard. When they arrive, the husband is in the courtyard with a handgun popping off shots into the air. My dad calls in his sergeant. When he gets there, he tells my dad to walk around the complex to the other fenced-in side. As my dad starts to head that way, his sergeant pulls a shotgun out of his cruiser. So my dad is finally in position. He's looking through the fence and hears his sergeant telling the guy to put the gun down. Dad looked away for a second, and the guy must have pointed the gun at them because all he heard was the shotgun go off. When he looked back through the fence, the guy had his left hand up in the air, and his right was just dangling by a piece of muscle. Dad's sergeant blew the guy's arm off. Now, fast forward 15 years, Dad is taking me shopping for football cleats. Hey son, see that guy over there? The guy with one arm? Yeah, that's the guy my sergeant shot. He was buying soccer cleats for his little boy. Story 23. Received a noise complaint at 2:30 a.m. We went to make contact with the individual, and when we arrived, the house was shaking to music that was so loud you couldn't understand the lyrics. We knock repeatedly with no response. After shining our flashlights into the window, he sees our lights and walks past the front door into the garage. At this point, we're concerned for our safety because we have no idea why or what he went into the garage for. He opens the door slowly, steps into the doorway, revealing his 60-ish-year-old man in nothing but his tighty whities, looking like Walter White. He begins to apologize and follows up with, "The Lady Gaga program is almost over anyways." Myself and the other officer can't control our laughter. We ask him to turn it down and leave in tears. Story 24. Obligatory not a cop, etc., etc. I used to live in the student area of a town city called Leeds. I say student, it was mainly a mix of students, first and second generation Pakistani, Bangladeshi, immigrants, and a much smaller group of hippie-ish locals, so a pretty high level of noise was tolerated in the local area anyway. Anyway, a common thing, while the universities are in session, was house parties. Now, when I say houses, most of these were old terraced houses, many of which had basements, so the standard was to have a sound system hired for the basement, occasionally a smaller one or a band in the living room. It was a fairly regular thing for the police to come along and say, "Hey, keep the noise down or we'll have to break up the party," possibly with drugs. But one night, this went wrong. The police turned up in their car. Both male and female officers went into the house. Down to the basement, leaving the car unlocked. Of course, some smartass threw the contents of a wheelie bin into the back seat, and someone else even managed to figure out how to detach and steal the lights. Of course, when the officers came out to find what had happened, all hell broke loose. Pretty much every officer in the city was called to the location. Riot police and students were in the streets causing carnage. None of the police really had a plan for what to do in the situation. There are still some videos kicking around the internet, although they were taken at night on camera phones a decade ago. 1, 2, 3. Story 25. Not a cop, but my dad called the security patrol at our apartment complex on the people above us for the pounding music at 10 p.m. at night. When security came by, who was a police officer who lived there and just getting off his shift, he heard the noise and was shocked. He said he'd take care of it. My dad goes to take a shower, and when he gets out, there's a few more cop cars. My dad sticks his head out and sees the cop and asks what happened. The cop knocked on his door, and the resident opened the door, saw the officer, and slammed the door in his hand. The resident got arrested, and they moved out a few days later. Edit. I need to clarify something here. When the resident opened the door, he didn't say anything, nor wait for the cop to say anything. He slammed the door immediately shut, which is when the officer lifted his hand and put it in the frame. The officer was off duty, but he was in his uniform. Story 26. I was with CPS, and me and a cop responded to a call about a child that was wandering the street. He was about 7, figured out where he lived, went home with him, got his mother's contact info from a neighbor, and called her home. It was about midnight. The house was open, and the cop, and me tagging along, were able to enter due to the circumstances. Mom comes home effing drunk as hell and tells us to leave. I step outside, and the officer is in the doorway, and she slams the door on him. It was a glass door with almost no frame, so it just shatters all over him and cut up his face. Needless to say, it went from just child endangerment to assault on an officer, and an ambulance had to come out and everything. And then I had to take the kid. Everything fun happens at night. Story 27. Not a cop, but my dad is. He got called to a noise complaint, and when he and his partner arrived, it's a bachelor party in full swing. They tell the guys about the complaint and ask them to turn it down. Guys say something along the lines of, "F you." So now they say, "We're not asking," and the groom responds by throwing a punch. They grab him and make to handcuff him when the entire bachelor party empties out of the house. My dad and his partner call for backup, and the scene devolves into an all-out brawl. Probably 10 to 15 cops and even more drunken partygoers. At some point, my dad's got a guy on the ground and he's putting handcuffs on him when a big guy comes up behind him and grabs my dad by the throat. He pulls him up in a headlock and my dad can't get free. All of the other cops are busy and no one notices that he's being choked out. His vision is going dim when someone finally sees and knocks the big guy out. In the end, the entire party was arrested, and my dad ended up with a few broken neck bones, a nice bruise, and permanent damage to his neck muscles. Irony of it all is that it was the wrong house. Dispatch sent him to 123 North Main instead of 123 South Main. There just also happened to be a loud party going on at that house. Story 28. So I was working security for my apartment complex. There were 3 of us that did this. Mostly this consisted of ticketing cars that were parked in resident parking and having them towed if necessary. There were three of us there that did this, all police officers. I had just arrived at the complex when one of the other officers called asking for help. They had received a complaint from a resident complaining of noise. The offending apartment was known to be a problem for noise complaints. Because of past dealings, we called for on-duty officers to respond. So we make contact with the apartment and they open the door. It was an apartment full of tap-out wearing MMA wannabe Air Force airmen who were drunk and watching some fights on pay-per-view. We say there have been complaints of noise. Crap went south from there. I don't recall what was said, but I do recall a fist come flying out of the apartment and striking one of the cops. Then people poured from the apartment and the fight was on. OC was deployed and someone tried to grab a cop's gun. It wasn't pretty at all. A whole lot went wrong on both sides. When it was all said and done, several airmen were in jail and eventually convicted of felony charges. An emergency eviction was granted, kicking them out in 3 days. And finally, I was told all Air Force personnel involved were kicked out. Some with dishonorable discharge. Not sure on that, though. All because they didn't want to shut the F up on a weeknight. Story 29. Not a cop, not even me, but possibly one of the funniest stories I was ever told. I told it once or twice on Reddit, but this thread is ripe to read it again. The story of Kenny's party. Kenny was a guy I worked with for a year or so at a small restaurant. He ate a steak every night, drank himself silly regularly. He had a bunch of guys over for the party. Loud music, lots of beer and whiskey. Eventually, someone put in a Dirty Harry movie and the boys loved it. Kenny went to his safe and pulled out a few of his pistols, removed clips, removed any chambered bullets, and then let the drunken party guests play with them. I know. Anyways, eventually the party died down. Amazingly, no one was shot, and the pistols were left on the coffee table. Eventually, it was just Kenny and another guy left in the apartment. For whatever reason, they pull in an adult content video and crank that up. Well, as you can imagine, the police were called. They just waltzed in the front door, which had been left wide open by the last drunk to leave. I can only imagine the scene the cops saw. Two fat dudes sitting on a couch with an adult content blaring, empty beer and liquor bottles, and a bunch of guns all over the coffee table. Kenny's response to seeing a cop in his apartment overlooking the chaos? Sup? Edit. Some have asked why I still tell this story even though it's not mine. Well, besides the fact it's funny as hell, I want to keep the name of Kenny going for years to come. Kenny died a good 15 years ago, sadly. I wasn't kidding when I said he drank to excess. He pickled his liver. Terrible lifestyle, but his hijinks were funny as hell. I have a few other stories to not give him a few more decades of notoriety. Story 30. I'm not a cop, but this story is irresistible. It all started with the rolling thumps of an excited cat at 2 a.m. My fiance had to be up in 4 hours and had finally started to drift off to sleep. I hadn't slept well for 3 days, and it was wearing him down. The rolling thumps of the running cat upstairs continue for 10 minutes and then fall quiet. Okay, good. Stupid furball stopped its neurotic thunk. We both bolt up. Crash! We look at each other in the dark and spring out of bed when someone starts screaming upstairs. I call the police and report the noise. This was a frequent problem with these idiots. Our daughter has woken up and someone is at our door. I grab the baby and my fiance answers the door. Our friend was walking home when he heard a bunch of crashing and a scream and thought maybe I was having a seizure. As we're talking to him in the doorway, we see the upstairs neighbor's husband coming down the stairs, shrieking, crying, and covered in bruises and blood. We rush our friend in as our neighbor is screaming out her door, "You bring your little female dog ass back here," and things of that nature. I ring the police, and as usual, they take their sweet time. Now, this complex is small and a little isolated, so when incidents like this happened, it got to the live-in property managers in no time. They come over, and we go outside for a smoke. They leave and ask to be updated when the police leave. My fiance brings the baby out, and she wants me. I toss my cigarette and turn to head inside, and my neighbor is blocking the doorway. Ninja idiot. She starts name-calling because I called the police. I tell her to can it and shove off. She then tells me to drop my kid and square off. Now that her cancer is in remission, she can fight me. I laugh and tell her to save it for canteen disputes. She gets mad that I'm not taking the bait, so she flicks her cigarette at me, which hits my kid in the face, and goes back upstairs to her lair. About 20 minutes later, the cops show up. Neighbor's husband had returned by then, was in our apartment, and I had cleaned up some of the excess blood. The lacerations on his face were pretty bad, but only 2 required stitches. My daughter was fine, with only a tiny red mark above her left eyebrow, but I was furious. Stupid idiot was hauled off to jail, and while they were shoving her in the back of the patty, she She was telling the police that she had just been told her cancer had come back. So glad we don't live in that apartment anymore. I will admit, though, I acquired some great bad neighbor horror stories while living there. The great couch and car fire of 2K15, the bedbug invasion, the landlord wars. Ah, so many. Story 31. My dad's buddy from either the academy or his partner from early days of patrol. While on patrol in 2000, got a call to a noise complaint by an old man. He went to the scene and the old man was sitting on the porch with a shotgun. He didn't wait for backup to come because, well, it was just a crotchety old man. No biggie. He got out of his patrol car and as he walked up towards the porch, the old man shot him in the face with the shotgun. He was probably in his 30s or early 40s at the most. His daughter is now in her 30s. So this is obviously a tragic end to a story, but like if you see him sitting on the porch with a shotgun, why would you try to handle that alone? Probably should have thought that through a little bit better. Call for backup. Story 32. Not a cop, but have some weird experiences calling police when I was an RA for my dorm in college. Got a noise complaint call on my duty phone at 3 to 4 a.m. Someone said they heard their neighbor, female, sobbing uncontrollably for a really long time. Knock on the door over and over again, and no answer, but I can tell someone's inside. I call the cops and have them knock and force them to open the door. They're allowed to force you to open without a warrant if there's suspicion someone's in danger. Door is open, and standing there is two Chinese girls, foreign exchange students, one looking creepy as crap and the other wearing nothing but a towel and crying in the corner. After quite a bit of questioning, it turns out they were dating and living together in the dorm. The creepy girl was trying to SA the other one. Had to figure this all out through very broken English from a really terrified girl. Creepy girl goes to the station and the victim girl got taken to a safe house dorm. Turned out way different than I expected, but I'm really glad I didn't give up when she wouldn't open the door eventually. 2. Call about a medical emergency at 4 a.m. The call made it seem like some girl was having appendicitis or something, but it turns out she was 7 months pregnant and having false labor pains. She was living in a dorm by herself at 7 months pregnant with no access to a car, and wouldn't tell anyone she was pregnant. Just a disaster waiting to happen. Had to figure out how to help her / get her to a hospital without an ambulance. She didn't want to have to pay for one at 4 in the morning. That was not in my training. 3. Got a call about rushing water in one of the community bathrooms. I go into the bathroom and laying in the full bathtub is a huge guy painted completely purple, fully clothed, submerged in water. He gets out and I try to figure out who he is. He's talking completely crazy, saying his name is Chun Wu. This was a black guy. At this point, I figured it was a frat initiation prank or something, but the more I talk to him, the more I realize he's actually crazy. So I call the cops and try to keep him at bay and keep him from walking down the hall to where the students lived because he kept heading that way. This dude was huge and it was pretty unnerving. Cops show up and he ends up needing to be tackled and taken away. Turns out he was a former student with mental health issues who broke into the dorms all the time doing weird crap. Story 33. I was an RA and it was crazy. I had cops to deal with, or alcohol poisoning and date essays, but I just let the sisters' bathroom threesome go. 2 sisters, 1 dude, communal shower at 2 a.m. The worst was getting police involved when a girl's stepdad was stalking her, both physically and through spyware and keystrokes on her computer. Stalking her since they'd been having a sexual relationship since she was a tween. 11 or 12, I think. And he'd been her dad since she was a baby. And her mom was pretending she just found out. Barfy, horrible situation. It wasn't the only reason, but I transferred schools after that. I kind of wonder what happened to all those people, but a lifetime in jail for both parents wouldn't be enough. Yeah, that's sick enough in and of itself, but for the mom to be also aware of that and cool with it is very, very twisted. That's, gross. Okay, let's just move on. Story 34. I called the police to make a noise complaint on the people above me. They partied all the time, and it was annoying. Well, the police show up, and I can hear them knocking upstairs. Boom, boom, boom. I look out my balcony window, and I see legs dangling from above. Some guy jumps onto my balcony, asking me to let him in. No? I called the police again and told them he was on my balcony. They knock on my door and I let them grab the guy. So freaky as a young woman alone in her apartment. Funny now though, dude just wanted me to let him in so he could escape out the far exit. Story 35. Got into law enforcement all ready to save the world and then got out 4 years later completely disillusioned with people. My noise complaint is funny now because it turned out okay, but at the time we thought it was like your link. Loud party call, first unit checks on scene. Dispatch checks status a few minutes later, no response. Second unit arrives on scene. Dispatch checks status, no response. Sergeant goes on scene, checking on his guys. Dispatch checks status, no response. We've now got 3 units on scene, and nobody is answering the radio. The whole district starts rolling to that location. About that time, first officer on scene hits the emergency button, which sets off alert tones and opens the channel in his radio, and all you hear is god-awful screaming. A few seconds later, the second officer calls for help. For those who don't know, help is effing serious to cops. Backup is whatevs. Requesting assistance is a little more urgent depending on the type of call and the tone over the radio. But when an officer says help, everybody effing goes balls out. We all arrive more or less the same time and find a huge party in a tiny house with people bailing out of doors, windows, effing everywhere, running away. We go charging in to find our officers and find the first officer wrestling with a drunk 400-pound half-naked woman who is covered in crap and screaming her head off. The second officer had never even found the first officer before he ended up surrounded in another room of the house, and somebody lit off a bunch of fireworks indoors, which filled the place with smoke and bangs, and he thought he was getting shot at. We start sorting things out and figuring out who's going to jail for what, and we still couldn't find the sergeant anywhere. Finally, somebody discovers this place as a basement and goes down, and there's the sergeant standing in the middle of this finished basement with a bunch of drunk and stoned college-age kids watching some vintage 60s adult content on VHS. This was the late 1990s, completely oblivious to the mayhem going on upstairs or the fact that 2 help calls had come out from the location he was standing in the middle of. It was kind of understandable because you couldn't hear crap over the music, but he got miraculously razzed for quite a while over standing there watching adult content while his entire district had a Donnybrook with 50-odd drunk partygoers right over his head. That was a effed up night, but hey, nobody died. Story 36. Before our first home game, my second year of being an RA, there are girls yelling and banging on the door of one of my girls. They're doing the whole "open up, you loser, it's game time" thing, and I get some noise complaints. But they start calling other people and get really worried. Then they can hear their texts and calls going to her phone inside. So I call my supervisor and the girl's roommate who's out of town to get permission to enter her room. After about an hour, my supervisor gets clearance. Apparently, the girl had been incommunicado for over 26 hours by the time they were able to open the door. We opened it and she's lifeless on the ground. Looks like she fell because she's at an incredibly awkward angle and her phone is in her outstretched hand where she fell. And the girls all start sobbing immediately. My hall director immediately calls the cops and motions toward me. So I have to go in and see if one of my little freshman residents was dead. By the freaking grace of God, she was still breathing. After some gentle shaking, she woke up. Couldn't remember anything, including her name or that she was at college. Turns out she'd been drugged and also had a concussion. She eventually recovered, but we never knew what happened. Poor girl also got hit by a car that year. She's alive, hopefully less unlucky. On a lighter note, my school accidentally accepted too many people one year and all the RAs started off with roommates. Mine was weird as F, but that's another story. One of the other RAs walked into her room 3rd week of school and the girl was rolling blunts on her desk. My friend had told this girl she really didn't care what she did as long as it was off campus, but this kind of crap could definitely get her fired. The girl freaked and shoved all the weed into a spiral notebook and lit out. The RA had to change rooms until student affairs could give the girl a trial. It was such a situation. Oh, and another dorm had a homeless man living in one of their bathtub rooms for 2 months before they realized. No one ever uses the bathtub rooms, so RAs never checked it on rounds. Big mistake. Story 37. Animal control officer here. I handle noise complaints when they involve animals, so usually it's about excessive barking, but not this time. I received a noise complaint about someone's cats, so I called the RP, reporting property, to get more info. I assumed they were obnoxiously loud Siamese cats or something, but no. This guy was complaining that his neighbor's cats, quote, played too loud at night. What? I went out to the property to see what was up, and it turns out these people don't even share a wall. It's neighboring mobile homes in a mobile home park. The RP was absolutely outraged because those damn cats keep him up all night when they bat their little toys with bells in them all over the place. He insisted I write their crazy cat lady owner a citation on the spot. Thankfully, I was able to use the municipal code to my advantage here and point out that before I could issue a citation, I would need to receive a second complaint, in writing, from another neighbor who was also bothered by the noise. No surprise, he couldn't convince anyone else to complain. And the cat lady and her rambunctious kitties lived happily ever after, because that crazy RP moved away a few months later. Story 38. Not a loud noise complaint, but a possible self-unaliving attempt. There was reports of a girl out on a ledge in a high-rise building, so we try to figure out which apartment it is. They let us in. It's a couple of girls and a guy. It turns out, no self-unaliving attempt, just some dumbasses sitting on really high ledge like it ain't no thing, smoking cigarettes. But as we were trying to figure out what was going on, we saw drug paraphernalia in plain view, which is probable cause enough to search. But just to be extra safe, we got permission from the girl whose apartment it was to search. We found a buttload of drugs and more paraphernalia, but also in plain view was a laptop open with a fake ID right there where you could see. Turns out the guy was on probation, or parole, for fraud and ID theft. The search also yielded a large plastic tub container of other people's identifying information. Bake 'em away, toys. Story 39. I may be late, but we had one turn into an officer-involved shooting. Not my precinct, and I had nothing to do with the call. We all heard the story, and it was a fresh reminder that the job doesn't usually end up with us speaking to happy, wealthy, and sane people. How it was explained to me, someone calls about loud music coming from a trailer. Officer and recruit arrive there and knock on the door. Dude apparently isn't happy and tells them that he's not going to turn it down. They threaten him with a citation, so he tells them that he's getting his gun. He closes the door and they back up to cover. He starts unloading on them from his front window and they return fire. He falls out of the now broken window in an old Western movie style, and I think he survived. Story 40. Not an officer, but police was called in for a noise complaint over here in Germany a couple of months ago. The neighbors got sick of this crazy dude playing the trombone at 5 a.m. They found the very decayed corpse of his girlfriend in the bathroom. Apparently, he couldn't find his glasses one day, accused her of stealing them, and being a government spy, tied her up and beat her until she lost consciousness. After she woke up, he continued, also using whips and crap, until she had cardiac arrest. He stuck a scarab in the corpse and tried to mummify her, wrapping her in rugs and towels, and just left her in the bathroom for weeks. Very sad, especially since the woman grew up in the same town as me and had a super crappy and short life. Story 41. It wasn't a loud music call, but close enough, so I'll share this story. In 2006, in Las Vegas, a person called about a neighbor smoking marijuana in their apartment balcony at an apartment complex on a street called Chartered Circle. The call was about a week after Sergeant Henry Prendis was ambushed and killed by a rapper/felon with an AK-47 during a domestic violence call. Officers arrived and were ambushed by a man in the target apartment immediately after they arrived. He continued to fire at them with heavy and sustained gunfire, pinning them to the doorway of a nearby apartment. They called for backup, and over 100 officers responded. A shootout with the subject ensued, and 44 separate officers fired a total of 605 rounds at the guy. He was shot 20 times and didn't stop shooting back until the 20th round, which came from a SWAT sniper, hit him in the head and killed him. The call itself was a major learning point for the Las Vegas Metro PD and fundamentally changed a number of internal policies. Story 43. Lots of weird things can turn up from these noise complaints. Domestic abuse, large parties, homicides in progress. Not really blown out of proportion, but this one noise complaint always sticks out in my mind. During the span of peak airtime for a certain Meghan Trainor song, our dispatcher felt like having a little fun with us. We got sent to a noise complaint and were told that the caller reported that it was all about that bass. It was a legitimate noise complaint, so after we had finished, I had to update dispatch in my best deadpan voice that the call was determined to be all about that bass, but the treble was unfounded. It's little moments like that where I hope somebody out there in police scannerland is amused by our antics. Yeah, this is a horrible dad joke, and because of that, it's very funny. I've personally found amusement in this story, and, if you don't find humor in a story like that, well, that's okay. You're just missing out on the finer things in life. Story 44. Not a cop here, but my first year in university, I lived in a split townhouse where my apartment was an above-ground basement apartment. Above this was the rest of the house where 6 frat boys lived. They would constantly have parties in the middle of the week until the early hours of the morning, screaming, stomping, etc., 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. When this first occurred, my roommate and I politely asked if they could turn the music down. They did not. We asked again, and it was turned down slightly, although it was still as if I was trying to sleep in a nightclub. It came to the point where we needed to contact the landlord. She talked to them multiple times, but ultimately did nothing to solve the problem. She eventually told us to switch the power off and back on after a few minutes, and the breaker was in our apartment. Each time one would come down and ask for it to be turned back on, we explained, again, politely but firmly, this couldn't keep happening. They did not listen. Due to the amount of times we told them to respect the people in the house sleeping, it caused them to become aggressive, because apparently wanting to sleep during the night and early mornings makes us, quote, effing idiots, female dogs, etc. Due to the walls and ceiling also being extremely thin, we could hear their conversations, not intentionally, but might I add, when there are 6 boys yelling about how the people downstairs are these things, it's kind of hard to miss. Not only this, we heard them threaten to break down our door. St. Patrick's Day, they threw a huge party, which was again in the middle of the week into the late night and early morning. My roommate knocked and knocked on the door, and everything was so loud they couldn't hear her. She went up and warned them to shut it off. Hearing this downstairs, terrified, I heard them yelling degrading things at her and then turn the music even louder. She came back down and shut off the power. They then sent one of their girls down to sweet talk us into turning it back on and lie to us that they were trying to cook food. As soon as she went back up, the music started again, and we shut it off again. This led to all, including the bimbos, to come knocking on our door and screaming in our faces and recording us with their phones. Eventually, they went back up, and one of their friends tried to break in. We called the police. They did nothing. Story 45. Not a cop, but I made what I thought was a noise complaint that escalated quickly. When my fiance and I first moved to the city we live in now, we woke up at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night/Monday morning to a car in the parking lot right below our apartment. They were playing the worst early 2000s pop music, in Gangsta's Paradise, incredibly loud. We decided to go out and ask them to turn it down, only to discover our neighbor passed out with his head against the steering wheel and all the doors locked. We tried banging on the window, but he didn't move. We called 911 because we thought something seriously wrong could be going on. When the cops got there, we went back inside but could hear what was happening. They ended up breaking the backseat window on the driver's side to unlock the doors and wake him up. He then gave them a credit card when asked for ID. When searching him, they found a baggie of something illegal, and everything got more serious. Was scared crapless when a couple days later he knocked on our door. Thought he knew it was us, but he just got some of our mail. Anyway, this was the beginning of a really tough part of life for this guy. He got a dog that he left alone all the time that barked constantly. Then he disappeared for a couple months, possibly in jail. Finally, an eviction notice showed up on his door, and on the last day he showed up with the truck and took everything out. For a while, we felt bad for calling the cops that night, but dude had some serious issues that would have gotten him in trouble sooner or later. Story 46. I'm a cop and a musician. There's a nearby town with a few bars on the edge of town. It's a great area for live music venues because it's out on the sticks and not many houses to bother. However, there's this one prick citizen who drives around to all the venues on weekend nights with a sound meter and checks the level at the property line and calls the cops if it's 1 decibel over the limit. The local PD usually don't respond, but it's still a nuisance. When I've played there, the owners/managers warn our sound engineer to check levels. It's just a jerk move. You could have a gunfight in one of these places and it wouldn't drown out the TV in the nearest house. Story 47. I guess this isn't way out of proportion, but I was at a small party at a friend's house where we were outside having a conversation at pretty normal volume. There were, I think, 5 or 6 of us. We were under a little tent, and pretty abruptly it started pouring rain. A cop rolls up like a half an hour later and tells us my friend's neighbor called in a noise complaint on us. I have no idea how they even heard us over the rain. My favorite part was how obviously pissed the cop was to be there. He was effing soaking wet, and he just says, yeah, maybe take it inside, guys, because people decide to call us instead of talking to their neighbors. Story 48. As a police officer, I've received a plethora of docile noise complaint calls, although this one is probably the strangest experience I've ever had on one of those calls. A neighbor called me saying they heard endless screaming coming from their neighbor's residence. I knocked on the door of the convicting party and was completely shocked to see a pair of dismembered testicles on the ground. I was shocked and quickly withdrew my handcuffs from my belt and asked what was going on. Turns out that the wife found the husband on the list of members on Ashley Madison. Witnesses outside the home said they heard screams such as, "Oh no, get away from me, please, stop unreasonably castrating me." Still one of the strangest calls I've ever been dispatched on. Now, I've heard of the term balls dropping, but this is taking it a little too literally, a little too seriously. Yikes. Story 49. Welp, time to break the not a cop but trend. Cop in Australia went to a noise complaint and was greeted by about 100 lads. Think wannabe gangster white kids that wear Nike dry fit hats, Nike teens, carry around bum bags, and have a tendency to get on meth and carry knives around. Always no bikies. And think they're pro MMA fighters because they wear tap out undies and speak like retarded 12-year-olds for any non-Australians. At this kid's house, because his parents were away, we turn up and tell him to shut the party off or he'll get a fine because we had a few complaints about it. He says, "I will try." I say, "Try not. Do not or do not get a fine, you will." Anyway, we go off and some other crap and come back in another hour because another crew went there. As we're going, we hear them call urgent and about 50 cops, including riot squad, turn up, and it becomes on for young and old. Turns out the other car crew found the kid whose party it was fleeing, as what he failed to tell us was the dip crap put the party on Facebook, and all his lad friends told their lad friends until we had people coming from the other side of the city, about 200 I believe, to party in this 2-bedroom Fibro house. And some of the dip crap's friends decided to trash his house and then try to fight the cops. There were people roaming the streets for a solid 2 hours, causing trouble after that. So a bit of fun for everyone, except for the poor neighbors who had to deal with a gathering of teenage bellends walking around. So yeah, noise complaints. Never underestimate them. Story 50. Wasn't really a noise complaint, but a lady called saying there's an argument going on next door. Get there, and the house has obviously had some domestic issues. Couch flipped over, glass broken, etc. Both parties just said they were drunk and arguing, and that was it. No worries. Easy. Well, as we're letting Homeboy out of the cop car, she almost offhandedly mentions that he slipped it in during the argument. Upon further question, she said he pushed her onto the bed and S8'd her. Well, that escalated quickly. Now he's in jail. Unfortunately, a year later we go to trial, and she was the worst victim possible. Incredibly confrontational and sarcastic on the stand. We even had decent physical evidence, but they found not guilty. She pissed off the jury. Story 51. Not a cop, but I used to live next to a totally insane woman who routinely called the cops for any and all minor noises. The most memorable one was when the cops knocked on my door at 4 in the afternoon on a Sunday because she'd called them to complain that I'd been vacuuming. They just rolled their eyes, apologized that she was insane, and left. Story 52. I went to a noise complaint recently. It ended in a double homicide. Guy heard his mom accidentally shatter the oven door and snapped. Shot her like 10 times with an FN 5.7. Neighbors called in a noise complaint and thought it sounded like gunshots. Guy talks to them in a fake British accent, then gets super agitated when they ask him about the noises. Guy leaves the house and goes to a different country. There, he stabs the guy about 20 times and steals his car. Guy comes back to his house the next day, and neighbors let us know, and the SWAT team surprises them as he steps out back for a smoke. Guy confessed to the whole thing. Story 53. Not a cop, but a funny story. I was sitting outside my girlfriend's place eating dinner and having a drink with my girlfriend and her friend. We were all cracking jokes, laughing, regular fun hangouts. Police show up. Now, we did have music going, about 40 decibels, out of a phone speaker. There had been a noise complaint because she was laughing too loudly. She laughed when she heard that. We all realized that, oh, actually, Abby, you're too effing loud. Like, ear pain loud. The cop was very, very surprised and asked us to take it inside. Story 54. Not a cop, but we called in a noise complaint when our neighbors decided to move their loud party onto the street, then started throwing bottles all over the road. The cops came and tried talking sense into the drunk woman who rents the house. Her friend then decided to slam the door on the cops and later tried to hit them with the garage door. The cops must have called for major backup after this, because within 3 minutes, the street was full of marked and unmarked cop cars, and the cops are in a huddle making a plan to shut the party down. As they're moving in, the dog vans show up and the handlers start unloading. At this point, the partygoers start getting the hell out of there, and the renter is still yelling at the top of her voice that it's her house and she can do what she wants.